Yep. Hello everyone. Welcome to this kind of different time Sunday special. So instead of doing it in the morning, I'm doing it in the evening for one time. So today is Sunday the 5th of September 2021. It is currently 8:03 p.m. and we will be covering, well, a week worth of news because I kind of missed out on a lot of things this week. It seems like the world is continuing to burn and things are not really lighting up in any possible way. I have not found much positive news other than, of course, the Paralympics, which, it's a sports event. There's always good stuff to come out of that. Now, let's just start with one of the more interesting ones, according to me. So, apparently, due to a lot of political turmoil that's been happening in Europe, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is kind of not really holding her position as a, let's put this in huge air quotes, European leader. And because of that, there's kind of a gap to be filled now, and a lot of people are wondering who's going to step up to take her place because, while she's been kind of guiding Europe forward for the past, 20 years? So a lot of people kind of don't know who's going to fill those shoes because France's Emmanuel Macron tends to have a bit too much of a Cobra attitude, according to a lot of people. He strikes out a lot. He's a bit more, a bit too aggressive. And then obviously, Boris Johnson of the UK can't really have that role anymore simply because he's not part of Europe anymore. So there's a bit of a struggle there, and people are wondering who's going to step up now that she's not really holding that role anymore. Continuing from that, and speaking of other troubles in politics in Europe, something else that's been happening quite interestingly is Gordon Brown, one of the ex-PMs of the UK, said that the G7 should they should share the millions of unused COVID vaccines that they have with the poorer parts of the world, namely Africa, simply because there are people who need these vaccines, and instead of going out and doing what Israel is now doing, which is to get a fourth dose, they should be sharing these vaccines with other people. Because yes, according to recent news, the health system in Israel has said that they will have to get ready for a fourth vaccination, and apparently that's going to simply be the new normal. Literally, the quote is, "This is life from now on," meaning that basically there's going to be regular boosters. Not sure exactly what they hope for with that, but I guess that's one way of seeing it. Now, continuing forward on the other kind of troubles that have been happening in Europe with politics and a few other things, there's kind of a big, I want to say, transition happening in Europe, and specifically in, I mean continental in this specific case, but there's a transition of power kind of happening between the post-Brexit and pre-Brexit worlds, namely due to the fact that, for example, Scotland is kind of on the verge of pulling a new independence referendum. So last time I did a news update, I covered the fact that Northern Ireland is thinking of withdrawing itself from the UK so that it can rejoin Europe, or at least change its laws, its border laws with Europe, and kind of be more independent in that way. Scotland kind of said that they would probably do the same should Brexit go through. So there's a lot of things happening in the political world post-Brexit specifically. So that's something to look into, and obviously let's see what happens in the future. Now, continuing forward with just a few other things from Europe, and then I'll travel to a bit more in the world. One of the more dramatic things is the fact that, according to the German health system, they have now reached 4 million cases in Germany since the start of the pandemic, which I believe, if I'm not much mistaken on their population numbers, that's a bit under or a bit over 5% of their total population. So that's quite a big number. That's a large chunk. I think actually it's a bit over 5% of their total population. So I mean that's quite impressive. Speaking of COVID, the ministries in England have been saying that it's going to need to implement a vaccine passport like they have in France, in Italy, and in a couple of other countries already, where basically you're going to have that to be able to go into certain venues. Of course, this includes sport venues, museums, restaurants, etc. Any place where there's a lot of contact. So we're kind of evolving now from contact tracing to vaccine passports. That's kind of the next step in most countries. Here in Korea, it's already a big thing. I haven't really seen, like being in the field, if you want to call it that, I haven't really seen any direct use of the vaccine passports yet, because we still use the normal contact tracing apps. But apparently, once you have had your second dose, that vaccine passport is kind of useful in some ways. Specifically in Seoul right now, you can only have 2 people together if after 6 if they're unvaccinated, but that number can go up to 6 people should the other 4 be fully vaccinated, so double dosed. That's just how that's been changing. Speaking of big groups of people, one of the big sports events of this time of year in the US is, of course, college football. And a lot of people are extremely happy about the fact that the stadiums are full of people again. But of course, this also leads a lot of people to be extremely worried due to the simple fact that packed stadiums means more contact. So fair enough, all these students have to be vaccinated. Like it has to happen for them to be on college grounds. But still, it would kind of be, well, it's going to be interesting to see what the cases are, what the case numbers are, what happens, etc. So I guess we'll see what happens. We'll see how things continue in the US, because a lot of teachers there are actually worried about the school shutting down again, and it kind of depends a lot on people's attitudes. I mean, I'm not saying you have to follow any specific rules or anything. I'm not going to go into that, but basically, depending on how you react to the situation, the people around you are affected less or more. That's just simply how it is, and not just with COVID. I mean, that's pretty much that's the case with everything. I mean, you can apply that to everything. Now, one of the other things talking about COVID that's actually been very interesting to me is the fact that a lot of people are apparently at risk of type 2 diabetes due to gaining way too much weight during lockdown. So that's that could honestly be one of the worst killer side effects of lockdown, because we all know that diabetes has a lot of health problems that it brings with it. It's not just diabetes, there's always other things that happen as well. And that's kind of worrying. I mean, it is very worrying actually. Of course, it's people that are more at risk. It doesn't necessarily mean there are more cases of type 2 diabetes already, but it definitely means that there is a risk of it happening, which in turn, has other side effects, has other possible problems. Now, of course, there's one thing we cannot skip over, and that is the fact that COP26 is going to be happening soon, and there's a lot of political stuff that's going to be happening there. Greta Thunberg said that she would only go, she's obviously been invited, but she will only go if and only if everyone's given a right to speak openly, if it's democratic, blah, blah, blah. She went into quite a lot of, she had quite a few things to say about this whole situation, and that she doesn't want to pitch up there if it's going to just be, big giant powers basically yelling at each other for no reason. So, I mean, I can respect that. That makes perfect sense to me. And continuing on what she said, actually, it's quite interesting because there's other political agendas that are kind of been, I want to say, people are worried about them being pushed through during that time. Naming, of course, the fact that the Scottish leadership kind of wants to possibly use this time, because it happens in Glasgow, to promote another Scottish referendum, and specifically another Scottish independence referendum, and even actually just directly promote their independence full stop, like not even talking about the how they're going to get there, more like just once we have our independence, this is what's going to happen. So of course that leads to 10 Downing Street being kind of worried, aka the British PM's office and so on. Like, I mean, there's a lot of fear going on around just how Europe is going to change post Brexit. And to me, that's a very interesting subject, actually, because, of course, I hold a British passport and I'm a French resident, but I'm living in Korea. So, I mean, I'm actually very affected by a lot of these things, whether I like to admit it or not. So it's quite interesting to see how that's going and what's going on. Now, of course, there is a need to talk about the situation in Afghanistan. I mean, we can't look over it. So a few things have happened. So especially around women's rights. So that's one of the things I really want to cover today, is the fact that there was a protest about a women's protest about their rights and retaining their rights under the new country's administration. And apparently it was met with bloody violence and the use of bullets, gunfire and tear gas. Of course, there's no direct reports on possible casualties or even harm that was caused, but I mean, we all know what tear gas does, especially if it's military grade. So yeah, let's just say that that's not a pretty sight right now. And in fact, continuing down that, a lot of countries have actually simply said that they don't really want to engage with the new Afghanistan until they fully recognize women's rights. So, in my personal opinion, that's an extremely positive thing. But also, I mean, if after 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the US basically lost the country completely in 2 weeks, do the Taliban really care about being friends with them now? I'm not sure. Like, it kind of seems, I mean, a lot of the countries that are saying this are countries that were participating in the war against the Taliban in Afghanistan. So it's possibly a little bit difficult for that to seem, I almost want to say credible, just because, of course, if you were recently at war with them, to now go and say, oh, by the way, we don't want to be friends with you unless you give this community or this gender or whatever rights. It's kind of like saying, by the way, we were worst enemies a couple weeks back, but now we'll be your friends as long as you fulfill this just one condition, right? It's a bit strange. I mean, I hope there's a bit more to it, a bit more depth than just what's being covered in direct headlines. I mean, I'm guessing there is. And of course, there's just a continuation of like situations that have been happening around that area of the world, honestly. And one of the things is, of course, the women who were recruited as brides for terrorist fighters. And a lot of interesting things kind of developed from those places, because there's these global villages where basically, I mean, some of these families, some of these groups are not even native to that area. They're like German or French or Russian, or, I mean, they're literally from everywhere. But they're still being trained for the same purpose of being extremist fighters. I mean, jihadists. It's quite impressive to just see the scope of that operation is honestly kind of scary. Now, let's just leave that behind a bit for now and cover a few other things before this episode's over. So one of the things I want to cover is, of course, the sheer amount of damage that's been happening in the USA with the floods and all the just terrible weather that's been going on there. New York is flooded, New York City that is, of course, and there's just an insane amount of damage, because of course you can imagine that a city with a massive subway system being flooded, it doesn't bode very well for them. Like, that can't be good in any form. I mean, we all know that subways are tunnels underground, so, having them full of water is probably not a good idea. Of course, there's a few other things that are very interesting about the situations in America general, aka North and South. For example, there's a lot of fear of violence in Brazil as people rally to support Bolsonaro, the current president, because, let's just say that there's a lot of well, there's a lot of things going on and a lot of things happening that make people wonder what's going to happen. Is the opposition actually going to physically clash with them or not? There is definitely a lot of fear about that. Going forth, another thing happening in the US is the fact that the Texas Boca Chica launch site for SpaceX is it's kind of being reprimanded due to the fact that it threatens the local wildlife, considering the fact that all the grounds around it are protected for wildlife and etc. And a lot of people are kind of, well, let's just say that they're kind of worried about the fact that if there's going to be constant rockets shooting up from there, it's probably not going to be great for the birds and, local fauna and flora. We all know that methane burning up is not exactly very, let's just say, eco-friendly. I mean, it's not as bad as some of the other things that can burn, but it's still pretty bad. Now, one of the other things that's been happening kind of in that area is, of course, the rather large oil spill, 14-mile long, which is, if I'm not much mistaken, about 20-something kilometers long oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And the energy firms, of course, are saying it's nothing to do with them, it's not their fault, blah, 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 it's everything to do with the hurricane. In my personal opinion, if you are a oil company, if you are currently producing oil and extracting it from the ground, you should probably also be aware about the fact that, hey, nature has power. Maybe you want to be prepared. So, yeah, that's not so cool. Something else that's quite interesting is the fact that a lot of countries are currently turning towards hydrogen as a more eco-friendly power source, which of course it is. Hydrogen batteries, namely hydrogen cars, hydrogen heat systems for their houses and so on and so forth. So that's a lot of interesting things about that going on. I'm guessing COP26 is going to have something to talk about when it comes to that. We'll see what happens. Now, one of the last things I want to cover before I talk about the Paralympics very briefly is the fact that due to COVID and due to just the global pandemic and the situation in the world, a lot of automation has been happening recently, and a lot of people are kind of wondering, is it going to stop kind of post-COVID, or are we looking at a world that's just going to get more and more automated? For example, there are now some fast foods where when you order, you're actually talking to an AI that directly sends your order in text form to the cooking line, to get your order ready. So there's no real human interaction between you and a person walking around in the fast food with a headset on talking to you. It's just an AI doing it. I mean, we know how fast and how powerful some of the AIs are, and specifically some of the voice recognition ones. It's going to be interesting to see how that changes, like how that moves forward. I'm actually kind of looking forward to see where it's going to hit road bumps, where it's going to fall into potholes, and hey, are there going to be any actual physical roadblocks or not? Who knows? It's going to be very interesting to see. Now, of course, last but not least, the Tokyo Paralympics closed today, and they were impressive. For anyone who actually watched them, I would love your input on this. So if you want to message me, go ahead. But I definitely think they were very impressive. I think some of the records that were beat were impressive. I definitely respect a lot of those athletes. I mean, honestly, they all deserve respect. That's goes without saying. I mean, all athletes do, because what they're doing is remarkable. It's just really impressive when you just see the sheer ability of some of these people. It's insane. So kudos to them. Good job. Seriously, wow. So I'm going to actually stop there for today's news update. One thing I do want to mention is the fact that the schedule for these news updates is kind of irregular on the moment, simply because I am actually, swamped with work for one thing, but mostly because I'm working on a lot of things, specifically learning Korean right now, which is taking up quite a bit of time. So I'm going to still try and keep a bit more regular weekly schedule. I don't know how it's going to work out, so basically just please subscribe to the channel and you'll see the updates as they come up, of course. So for now, I appreciate everyone who is here, who watches this. Thank you very much. Please share it around. It would really help my channel grow. Of course, again, as I always say, if there's anything you want me to cover specifically, even if it's something really, really far-fetched and irrelevant to global news and stuff, hey, I would be interested, you know? There's a lot of things that I'm interested in the world. Send it my way, I'll have a look at it and maybe make an entire episode just about it. Why not? It could be fun. Also, if any of you guys would be interested in some of the other projects that I do, please check out my website. That's merlingideon.com. There you will find links to literally everything I do. I'm thinking of bringing my writing stuff into this YouTube channel a little bit. So doing the news podcasts and maybe doing some of my author stuff as well. I'm going to be recording audiobooks pretty soon, so that's going to be quite fun. We'll see how things go, how things evolve. I don't know which projects are going to work well, which ones are not. It kind of depends a lot on you guys, so please share around my work. Liking, commenting, subscribing, all those things really helps me a lot. So thank you very much for tuning in. I will catch you as soon as I can, which will probably be tomorrow morning for me. For some of you, that's tonight. You know, time zones. So thank you very much. And for those who are still enjoying their Sunday, have a lovely Sunday. And for everyone else, I wish you an amazing week. Talk to you soon. Bye.